Every nurse on the floor flinched when the alarm went off wrong. Renee Castillo didn't, a habit from a place none of them had ever thought to ask about. Bay 6. A 33-year-old with an 18-month-old daughter at home. And a pump doing exactly what someone had decided, months earlier, not to fix. Renee was the only one on the unit who caught it in time, and the only one willing to say out loud why it had happened at all. Now, from the beginning. Like you don't know any of this yet. Ridgemont Memorial Medical Center was 10 weeks out from the national quality review that would decide whether it merged into the larger Beacon Health Network as an equal partner, or got absorbed as a smaller one. And everyone on staff had heard some version of that sentence by now, usually from Gregory Hale. Hale was Vice President of Patient Experience and Quality. Mid-40s. The kind of administrator who remembered the names of night shift janitors, and said them out loud in the elevator. He ran the hospital's town halls personally, brought coffee carts around during flu season, and had a line he used often enough that staff had started saying it back to each other as a joke. The story we tell matters as much as the story that's true. Renee Castillo had worked the ICU at Ridgemont for 3 years. She was 34. Dark hair always pulled back tight. And she wore a plain digital watch with a stopwatch function that looked out of place next to everyone else's smartwatches. An old habit nobody had ever asked her about directly. She double-checked infusion pump settings against the written order every single time. Letter by letter. Even when a physician read the order back to her out loud. Newer nurses found it strange. Older nurses had just stopped noticing. She pressed 2 fingers flat against her own sternum in the seconds before a code, just below the collarbone, and breathed slow through it before she moved. Nobody had ever seen her voice shake. It had cost her something, a long time ago, to learn how to sound calm, when nothing about the situation was. She had an 81-year-old patient in Bay 4, a retired postal carrier named Walter Sipes, and she'd taken to bringing him the crossword from the free newspaper in the lobby every morning. He complained the hospital's activity sheets were written for people who'd never learned to read past a 4th grade level. He filled in maybe 6 clues before his pain medication pulled him back under, and Renee finished the rest herself on slow nights. Then left the completed page folded on his tray table. So he'd wake up believing he'd done it. Down in biomedical engineering, a contract technician named Nate Kowalski had opened a service ticket 6 weeks earlier, flagging a software update on the hospital's infusion pump fleet. It was a glitch that could, under a specific and rare sequence of button presses, let a nurse override the pump's built-in dosage limit warning. Without a second confirmation screen, he'd flagged it as urgent. The ticket had been marked resolved 4 days later by someone in administration, with a note that read, addressed via staff retraining. Though nobody in biomedical engineering had run any such training. And Nate, a contractor renewing his position every 90 days, hadn't felt he had the standing to ask who had closed it. ORY. The charge nurse on Renee's unit was Priya Anand, 29. Sharp and well-liked. The kind of nurse hospital leadership photographed for recruitment brochures. She'd grown up the daughter of 2 immigrant pharmacists who drilled into her that institutions rewarded people who stayed inside the lines, and for 29 years, that had mostly proven true. Hale had personally nominated her for the hospital's leadership development cohort that spring, and had told her in front of 2 directors that she was exactly the kind of clinical voice this hospital needs at the table. Said in front of 2 witnesses, by someone with the power to make it true. Priya believed it completely. The Monday the quality review countdown hit 10 weeks. Hale held a town hall in the main auditorium. Coffee and pastries were laid out on a folding table, with a countdown clock projected on the screen behind him. Every one of you is the story this hospital tells, he said, and the room applauded. Renee stood near the back with her arms crossed and said nothing, because there was nothing yet worth saying. If you like stories about the things institutions try to keep quiet, hit like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. 3 weeks later, Renee noticed the first thing that didn't sit right. An infusion pump in Bay 6 had a firmware version number that didn't match the fleet-wide update log Biomedical had posted the month before. She mentioned it to Nate directly, in the equipment closet. The two of them the only people who ever checked those numbers closely enough to notice they were wrong. That version's supposed to be retired, Nate said, checking it against his tablet. There was a glitch in it. I flagged it in March. Ticket got closed. Said it was handled with retraining. He didn't look at her when he said it. Nobody trained anybody. Which glitch? Override on the dosage limit warning. Wrong sequence of taps and it lets a nurse push right through the pump's own limit, without the usual second confirmation. Nate lowered his voice. The way you do in a hospital hallway when you're about to say something you can't take back. I don't love that it got marked fixed. Renee filed the version number away in the small spiral notebook she kept in her scrub pocket for exactly this kind of thing. If you'd asked her why she bothered, she'd have told you only that it was easier than trusting her memory. At the next staff huddle, she raised it, carefully, without accusation. The numbers laid out plain. Bay 6 is still running the pre-patch firmware. Biomed's ticket says it was resolved through retraining, but nobody's been retrained on anything. Hale, sitting in on huddle that week ahead of a mock survey walkthrough, smiled the smile he used in town halls. I appreciate the diligence, Renee, I really do. But I'd be careful about the instinct to treat every open ticket like an active emergency. Some of us came up through backgrounds where every call was a 5-alarm fire. This floor runs on measured responses. A couple of nurses laughed. Not unkindly. The way people laugh at something they don't fully understand, but sense is meant to be funny. Renee didn't know what he meant by backgrounds. Exactly, and didn't ask. I just think the ticket should reflect what actually happened, she said. I'll have someone look into it, Hale said, in the tone of a man closing a folder. And the huddle moved on to parking garage repaving. It didn't get looked into. The ticket stayed closed. Bay 6 kept its outdated firmware for another 11 days. Because outdated firmware wasn't visible to a survey team unless somebody pointed at it. And pointing at it, 10 weeks before the review that would decide whether Gregory Hale became regional director of a merged 4-hospital network, was not something anyone above Renee's pay grade seemed eager to do. Hale brought it up again himself, unprompted, at the following week's leadership walkthrough, stopping the small procession of directors and consultants outside the ICU doors specifically to make a point of it. This is Nurse Castillo, he told them, warmly, the way he introduced everyone. One of our most thorough clinicians, sometimes to a fault. She'll flag you a firmware version number. The way some people flag a fire. The consultant smiled the polite smile of people who didn't know if it was a compliment either, and moved on toward radiology. Priya, trailing the group, gave Renee a small apologetic shrug that meant, he's not wrong that you push harder than anyone on this floor. And she went back to her rounds, still believing the hospital's forward motion mattered more than one open ticket about one pump in one bay. Nate found Renee again 2 days later. Quieter this time. In the equipment closet with the door half shut. I pulled up the ticket history before it got locked down. There's a name attached to the closure. It's not Biomed. It's admin. He didn't say the name out loud. He didn't have to. You should keep a copy of that, Renee said. I already did, Nate said. Didn't feel like the kind of thing I wanted to only exist in one place. He glanced at the door before he kept talking. I'm 90 days at a time here. Renewed 4 times so far. If I'm the guy who says the VP's office buried a safety ticket, I'm not getting a 5th renewal. And everybody down in Biomed knows it. Which is exactly why nobody's said anything before me. He said it without self-pity. Just as a fact he'd already made peace with. The way you make peace with weather. Doesn't mean I'm going to stop keeping copies, though. Why not? if it costs you the job. Because I already watched one ticket get closed on a lie, Nate said. I'd rather be unemployed than watch it happen twice, and know I could have stopped it the second time. That Thursday, at the second town hall of the month, a slide went up showing the hospital's safety event trend. It was a single, clean downward line, with no sentinel events logged in 14 months. Renee watched Hale click through it with the practiced ease of a man who had built the slide himself. And she thought, without yet having proof of anything, that a clean line usually meant someone had decided which dots to draw it through. Hale had 18 months of goodwill on his side. Renee had a spiral notebook. She put it back in her pocket anyway. The following Tuesday, Daniel Ferris, 33, 2 days post-op, a wife and an 18-month-old daughter waiting at home, was recovering in Bay 6 on a routine pain management infusion, when his monitor alarm went off wrong. Not the rhythm of a man in expected discomfort. The flat, insistent tone of a man whose breathing had slowed to something his body couldn't sustain. Renee was in the room within seconds, and the numbers told her everything before she'd even looked at his face. Respiratory rate collapsing. Pupils pinpoint. The telltale signature of an opioid dose his body had no business receiving. She glanced at the pump. The display read a rate nearly 4 times what the written order specified. A night nurse covering the overflow shift had entered it by hand off a verbal order an hour earlier. Tired, in a hurry, and the glitch that was supposed to catch a number like that had simply let it through. Push naloxone, now, and get me anesthesia and a rapid response team, she said, and her voice didn't rise even a half step. Somewhere underneath the numbers, for exactly 1 second, she heard a different silence. A woman named Dana, years ago, going quiet on a phone line while backup was still 4 minutes out. That silence had won. This one wasn't going to. Priya would remember, afterward. Not the crisis itself, but how completely unsurprised Renee had looked in the middle of it. Like she'd been waiting her whole career for the chance to answer this exact kind of quiet. The reversal agent worked, but slowly, and for 90 seconds that felt considerably longer. Daniel Ferris's numbers didn't move at all. Renee called out clear numbers to the resident at her shoulder, and did not look away from the monitor once. Priya, who'd come running at the first overhead page, stood near the doorway and watched Renee work with an expression she couldn't quite name at the time. Not fear, exactly. More the particular unease of watching someone perform a skill so completely that you start to wonder where they learned it. Down the hall, Walter Sipes's call light blinked. Unanswered for the only time all month, because every hand on the unit was in Bay 6. Pressure's coming up, the resident finally said. SAT's climbing. He's coming back. Then we don't relax until he's fully back, Renee said. Not partway. Only once the room had actually stabilized. Once Daniel Ferris's numbers had held steady for a full minute and someone else had taken over charting. Did Renee step into the supply alcove around the corner? She let her hands shake. Just for a few seconds, out of view of anyone who might have needed her to look certain a moment longer. Then she pressed 2 fingers to her sternum one more time, breathed until it passed, and walked back in like nothing had happened, because by then nothing had. Not anymore. Hale arrived at the unit within the hour. Not for Daniel Ferris, but for the incident report already being drafted at the nurse's station. He read over the resident's shoulder, his expression carefully arranged into concern. Let's make sure this gets framed accurately, he said. A dosage error caught and corrected quickly by an attentive nursing staff. That's a good story, and it's a true one. It's not the whole one, Renee said. This is the same firmware glitch Biomed flagged in March. The one that got marked resolved. The nurse's station went quiet. In the particular way a room goes quiet when somebody has said the thing everyone else had privately agreed not to. Priya, restocking supplies 3 feet away, stopped moving. A resident in the doorway suddenly found his tablet very interesting. That ticket was addressed, Hale said. and something in his voice had gone thinner than the town hall version of it. Addressed how? Nobody retrained anybody. Nate can show you the ticket. I'm not going to let one contractor's documentation habits turn a good outcome into a crisis 10 weeks before the review that decides this hospital's future, Hale said. And for the first time since Renee had known him, he sounded less like a man delivering a line, and more like a man doing math out loud. This report gets filed as a near miss. Equipment malfunction. Promptly corrected. That is what happened. A man almost died in that bed because a mistake got hidden in March, Renee said. If it's hidden again, it happens to somebody who isn't lucky enough to have the right nurse in the room. You don't understand what's writing on this review, Hale said, and his voice had dropped the town hall warmth entirely now. 4 hospitals, hundreds of jobs, a merger that keeps this building open in 10 years, instead of shuttered like 3 others in this state already are. I am not going to let one bad afternoon undo 18 months of work over a technicality that got corrected in real time. It's not a technicality if it almost killed him, Renee said. And it didn't get corrected. I corrected it. The system did exactly what it was built to do wrong. Hale didn't answer that. He looked, for just a moment, like a man doing the math and not liking where it landed. And then he straightened his jacket and walked toward the elevator without another word. Which everyone on the floor understood, correctly, as the closest thing to losing an argument they had ever seen him do in public. Daniel Ferris was moved to a step-down unit that night. Stable. His wife sitting in the chair beside him gripping his hand like she hadn't quite let go of the fear yet. Nate came up to the ICU near the end of shift, tablet in hand, and found Renee and Priya both still at the nurse's station. I pulled everything, he said. The ticket system's ours in biomed. Pulling an edit log is the one thing my access actually lets me do. It's Hale's assistant's credentials, but the edit came from his office IP. I have screenshots. I backed them up somewhere that isn't this building's server. Priya was quiet for a moment, turning something over. He told me I was exactly the clinical voice this hospital needed at the table, she said, finally, to no one in particular. I believed that meant something. It might have, once, Renee said. Doesn't mean it still does. How did you know, though, Priya said, turning to her. The second that alarm went off. You didn't even look confused for a second. Everyone else in that room lost at least a beat. You didn't lose any of it. Renee was quiet long enough that Nate looked up from his tablet. I used to work dispatch, she said. 911, for 7 years, before nursing school. Dana was a call in my 4th year, background noise. Someone else in the room with her who shouldn't have been. She went quiet mid-sentence. Not hung up quiet, chosen quiet. The kind where you can hear someone deciding not to say the rest of it, because saying it costs more than staying silent. Our response time that year was inside every target the department had. Numbers looked perfect on paper. She still didn't make it, because 2 minutes is nothing on a spreadsheet, and it's everything in a room. I transferred out 4 months later. Told myself it was a career change. Took me a long time to admit it was closer to running toward a room, because I couldn't stand being on the other end of a wire. Not in one, again. Nobody at the nurse's station said anything for a moment. Priya reached over and, without quite deciding to, took the tablet from Nate's hands and started reading the ticket history herself. I laughed when he made that joke about 5 alarm fires, she said quietly. In the huddle, I laughed. You didn't know what it meant yet, Renee said. Neither did I, honestly. He didn't know it either, he was just being cruel in a direction he didn't understand he was aiming. Priya didn't say anything to that for a moment. Then she slid the tablet back toward Nate. Send me everything you have. I'll file it under my name, not yours. If Hale wants to explain a closed contractor to the board, he can try. He's not explaining a charge nurse. The state health department received Priya's complaint 8 days later. Filed under her own name with Nate's documentation attached in full. The March ticket. The falsified closure. The login trail. And Daniel Ferris's incident report. now amended to name the equipment failure that had been hidden once, and had nearly killed a man the second time it went unfixed. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected, in part because a hospital 10 weeks from a national quality review has very little appetite for a drawn-out fight with state regulators. Gregory Hale was placed on administrative leave within the week, and did not return. The merger vote went through anyway, but without him, and without the regional director title that had been the actual engine underneath every clean slide he'd ever shown a town hall. Investigators pulled 2 years of incident logs once they started looking, and found the pattern went back further than the March ticket. 3 other near misses quietly reclassified out of the reporting system, each one timed to a moment when a bad number would have landed somewhere inconvenient. Daniel Ferris went home 11 days after the code, walking his daughter around the block on legs that were still a little unsteady, in a way his wife told Renee she'd remember for the rest of her life. Priya requested a transfer off the leadership cohort Hale had built, and asked, instead, to sit on the hospital's new patient safety committee. The one formed so that no single administrator could close a ticket without a second signature from clinical staff. She kept Hale's old line taped inside her locker for a while afterward. The story we tell matters as much as the story that's true. Just to remember how good it had sounded, before she knew what it cost. Nate made permanent staff 2 months later, and Walter Sipes finished his own crossword. Unassisted. The same week Daniel went home, Renee kept working the same unit, in the same watch, still pressing 2 fingers to her sternum before every code. Out of a habit nobody had fully explained to her satisfaction, even now. It still worked. Gregory Hale built a career on the idea that the story an institution tells matters as much as the one that's true. Right up until a nurse who'd once listened to a silence she couldn't undo decided a clean number wasn't the same thing as a safe one, and said so anyway. How many clean numbers have you trusted, just because nobody in the room asked what they were hiding?